your way. You bring the same classes.
And it took me a second to get it, but I do now. And I will say that there's one team right now that has qualified from the NA, right? And that team is going to be none other than Method. And one of the things that they have done very well is they don't let the other teams affect their tempo. They go about the pulls exactly what you were saying, Rob, their way. But taking a peek right now, we are going to see relatively similar compositions coming out from these two squads. A little bit closer to meta on Team Omegasniped having that Monk, but for you, Sours, I'm sure you're excited to actually see the Hunter once again.
Of course, the Hunter is back again. Nobody thought a Hunter would make it this far in the tournament, but here we do have a Hunter in the losers finals, or the lower bracket finals. He's doing an excellent job here on this pool. This is a really scary pool, but both teams have gone into this, done the exact same trash. They haven't lost a single person. Things are looking really scary, right? They've got to be careful of these explosive orbs. I'm wondering who the Dark Slashers has assigned, of course, to handle those, as the Marksman Hunter did actually end up rolling Beast Mastery in the previous explosive dungeon to handle those orbs, and now he's back on marksmanship again.
We'll also note, we saw right out of the gates for Team Omegasniped, they are going to go with that heroism. They're going to use it there, so that is going to be already used from them. They're getting dangerously low here as well. As you can see, I'm fired up, still getting chunked. Luffy going to be taking a substantial amount of damage as well, but even with using that heroism, they aren't really at a place where you can say that they are further than Dark Slashers. They're at the same percentage. They're just moving up to the pool that Dark Slashers is currently engaged on, and this trash can be a little bit spoopy here inside of the thickest of thickets.
Certainly not, right? So what happened likely there was that Sanguine can quickly get out of hand, and on this 24 setting, that Sanguine is going to heal, of course, a percentage of health. So these mobs which have huge health pools will heal a huge amount from that Sanguine puddle. You don't want to be standing in that. Perhaps Glix was just standing in just then. You don't want to die to any of these abilities. The damage gets a lot more terrifying as the numbers start racking up. You know, small mistakes in here can really, you know, set your timer back further and further. Omegasniped has now 2 deaths, which you don't want to see out of them. Dark Slashers still playing cleanly through to here.
Yeah, now taking a look, Team Omegasniped, they're going to have these 2 deaths that you need to take those into account, and now we see them jumping on down, figuring out what they are going to be pulling next. And the first big skip opportunity usually does come in at these bears, getting over to Gladalis, getting over to that first boss. There are no rogues on either of these sides, so we got to keep that in mind. Any of those skips that really are going to come in are either going to come from those cute little deaths. We've seen quite a few times Warlocks being used for that, or the other options that we have are going to be off of those potions, but Malign going to be taken down, and how we're going to see deaths all over the place. This is, we're getting to the point where obviously this is one of the most important, you got to say, this is one of the most important games that we've seen so far, but also the difficulty is going to represent that as well. In this 24 key, you can't feel safe at any moment, and these bears, they can be a little bit overbearing.
Looks like somebody on Omegasniped has accidentally face-pulled a mob. That's really what you don't want to have happen. They did have a failure detection pylon down there to save them, so Luffy will be able to res himself up and mass res the whole team. Meanwhile, Dark Slashers is actually pulling ahead again. They were able to activate that RP thanks to the stealth out of Edelweiss, and now they're engaging the boss, where Omegasniped is waiting for that pylon. And of course, what's really scary about when you pylon yourself is if you've been dying a lot of times, it can take an extremely long amount of time for that pylon to offer that res back up to you. Luckily, he is back up and resing his team.
So very well played by them. They actually do use Rev to kind of pull those bears away. They're going to skip that trash. They don't want to have to deal with that pull. And then speaking of bears, we are going to see a very nice thing for Edelweiss is being able to basically have a constant defensive cooldown, being able to go into bear form, as Gladalis will be going into cat form, jumping out at the furthest target. So Edelweiss just gets to stand all the way in the back, ensuring that she is going to be the one to take that damage and going into bear form. Frenzied regen that right off. Not going to be too much of a problem there, but definitely worth the death to get past that bear pack, and now they're getting their damage in on Gladalis, and they save that heroism, unlike Team Omegasniped, who used it on the trash bowl, so Dark Slashers got to use that at the beginning of this encounter.
Of course, yeah, this is a tyrannical 24 setting, so these bosses are going to all be taking a considerable amount of time to fall. Edelweiss has got to be, you know, careful. You see her shifting into bear form fairly early for that cat jump. Now it will be doing a physical damage, so all of the bonus health and armor from shifting into bear form is very required for taking that hit. If at any point in time somebody needs healing and she starts to fall behind and can't quite shift in time, then it could very easily kill her, and they only have 1 battle res available. Of course, this dungeon has just started. started, and they will need to wait a lot of time for that second battle red charge to come. See, Rev here is now pulling these bears to the side to allow his team to get into the boss room. He is going to die now. Of course, he has to be mass rest up, but they do have a couple of deaths on the board that weren't intentional, but of course, this is one of those intentional deaths that we do often see here in these dungeons.
Omegasniped, though, has definitely fallen behind, and we talked about the fact that these teams, when they did play each other, it was very unclean last time when they saw each other. The difficulty here is going to be much higher, so that is going to be having its impact. I don't think it's as much that these teams just really do feel the pressure when they're playing against each other. I think they are feeling the heat of this. This is about the thickest key that you're going to see. So 24 Dark Heart Thicket already taking its toll on Team Omegasniped. Dark Slashers get that Gladealis pull much earlier. They don't have the deaths to deal with, and now they're going to be hanging out in the 20% range as Team Omegasniped only just starts to hit that 75% mark.
Yeah, certainly both teams are very Gladealis. They've made it this far in the tournament, and they're going to have to really clean up what they're going to be doing for the rest of it. Boss is on 20% now for Dark Slashers. They're doing a really good job, a nice clean effort. You see that all this junk all over the floor is going to be very dangerous, doing well to avoid standing in that. Players have been getting low and standing, maybe taking even one tick previously, but as long as nobody dies, they keep going cleanly. They're not too much to worry about. Omegasniped is, actually doing quite a lot of damage to this boss here, but they are still 50 full percentage behind on the boss. They pulled it significantly later than the Dark Slashers, and these bosses do take quite a lot of time to be brought down.
Whew, that felt explosive. Scared me for a second, but ultimately you can see Malene, I believe, was the one who was able to snap on over to it, but that one looks like it may have gone off. Dilemma going to go down, and Glick shortly after, not being topped after taking that huge surge of damage, is going to be taken down, and we are going to see 2 deaths. Gladealis does now fall, but that is 5 deaths on the side of Dark Slashers, and this is really the last checkpoint that you are going to get, so enjoy it right now. Get on back up to fight another day. 26% of the trash out of the way, 1 boss down, and still got an additional 15 seconds, not even including the fact that there's 30% health on Gladealis left over Team Omegasniped.
That was potentially almost extremely bad for Dark Slashers there. If they had a full wipe at that low health percentage, they would have lost so much time, but they did end up making it out of there nice and smoothly, and they are just engaging this small trash pool. They do have 2 dryads. They're hip-hopping about, and a couple of flowers to deal with, while Omegasniped just has now hit that 20% mark on Gladealis, doing a good job. Everyone's looking pretty safe. They have a Warlock who's going to be much better at handling explosives than any of these players over here on the Dark Slasher side. It looked like the poor Hunter was trying to perhaps aim shot these with that volley. Of course, any sort of cleave damage that you try to cast at a explosive orb will end up doing no damage to it, and so the Marksmanship Hunter is definitely not the best class at handling killing those, but the reason why you'll see a Marksmanship Hunter here in Dark Heart Thicket as opposed to a BM Hunter is the damage output from some of these later bosses is simply way too much for a BM Hunter to handle, and having that damage reduction that is in the Marksmanship's toolkit from their artifact weapon is essential for staying alive on some of these tougher bosses.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we saw that obviously those fellow explosives got out of hand, so it was pretty much all hands on deck during that last boss fight. So it doesn't matter how good you are, at a certain point you need to just kind of pony up, deal with them, and try to hope for the best. But we will see just phenomenal damage coming out from the Hunter right now, but Glick going to go down. That is the 6th death for them, and at this 24 level, definitely not seeing the cleanest runs to start things off. Already hitting a pretty a notable amount of deaths, we're going to say, Sour, because we see 6 on the side of Dark Slashers and 8 on the side of Team Omegasniped, and the real scary stuff is the bosses that are coming up. They're going to be so difficult. They're going to have these mechanics that can be very one-shotty, and we're just starting to get to their part of the woods.
Oh yeah, this wood is, it's a wild journey through here, throughout all of these mystical forests. They've pulled 3 of these keepers now. Now these 2 keepers here that they've pulled off from the side are actually not going to be good friends with those flowers at their feet, and then they pulled this last keeper, likely was freezing trapped or CC'd in some form in that side pack, so they could do all 3 of them at the same time. Now these guys are not going to heal each other, they're only going to be healing those flowers, but they are going to be spawning a lot of these mushrooms. Now you cannot even run through one of these mushrooms with an immunity, so the team is doing a really good job here at kiting these around, not only to avoid the sanguine, but if they touch one of those mushrooms, it's not going to be a fun time.
definitely don't want to be doing that. And we can see Rev is going to move around and pull some of these additional flowers. They're worth a good amount of percentage. Going to try to group them all up here. Looks like he was kind of stuck between a rock and a flower there for just a second. Now he is going to be able to group them all up. The rest of the group's going to be able to come in tow. And this is where Dark Slashers can pull a decent amount of percentage. Everybody helping out with those fell explosives there. And instantly the Demon Hunter going to be able to come in, get that stun out. And now it's just going to be an easy day of picking the weeds.
Yeah, so, you know, a little bit, maybe too much on the defensive side there from Rev, as he looked like he got a little caught up there on that post. You know, but these two teams are doing these pulls a little bit differently. Omegasniped is actually very, very close behind to the Dark Slashers. It looks like, you know, like Dark Slashers pulled quite ahead in the beginning, but they had a little bit of slop in the handling of that. They ended up running some of the keepers over some sanguine puddles, but it was when they were still at full health, so they didn't lose too much damage on it. But Omegasniped is just handling all of these pulls a little bit faster than Dark Slashers is, and you know, they're still right on their heels despite this huge difference in that time that it took for them to claim that first boss.
Yeah, you know, I would say kind of the big difference right now is Dark Slashers. It's kind of been death of 1,000 cuts. They've had a lot of tiny mistakes, and you know, they were going very quickly at the beginning, but they have those tiny mistakes, so they're getting encumbered. They're slowing down a little bit. Team Omegasniped, on the other hand, had one very big blunder, one very noticeable blunder. Then they get to the first boss, and after that, it's been mostly smooth sailing. If Omegasniped keeps up on this trajectory, they probably are going to be able to take the dungeon. If Dark Slashers tighten up, they probably still do have a little bit of a lead, but they can't continue to make these tiny little mistakes. But very excited to see what these teams are going to be able to do as they get very close to the second boss, which is going to be Oakheart. They're going for that ooey gooey chewy pool right now, and we know that this is a pool that can be quite scary. Once you get up to this difficulty, you want to try to blanket them and try to avoid those casts that they can get
looks
off.
like another full wipe coming out for Team Omegasniped. These explosives and something else got a little bit out of control. The full team is dying now. It's something that you really don't want to have happen. Well, Dark Slashers has cleared up and handled all of those terrifying mobs there, those ooey gooeys. They did a good job interrupting it, and Omegasniped is now going to have to make their way back here. Now, they did get that first checkpoint after killing the first boss. Hopefully everything is doing okay on their side.
Look at how much damage Oakheart on the 24 is really going to be able to get out to that entire group all at once, just chunking them down. But yeah, that kind of switches up what was going on. You know, Dark Slashers having those small little mistakes that were adding more and more time. Team Omegasniped is going to have another massive one come in. They're already up to 14 deaths. So Dark Slashers once again pulling ahead here. Now they are going to be chopping away at Oakheart. And we know one of the things that can happen here, because they are going to be running this Resto Druid, that can be kind of their savior to deal with all of these roots. Just shift out of them. But we are going to see Demon Hunter be going down. They do have 2 battle reses. They're going to invest one here. Oakheart still with a huge amount of health. Definitely the right play there. What are the mechanics that the tank needs to be worried about on Oakheart?
Of course, the 2 scary things that the tanks have to worry about here on Oakheart is he is going to pick up the tank at a certain point in time and do a ton of damage. You see him now has picked up Rev in his hand, and he is going to slam dunk him right onto a ranged player in the group. And during that time, of course, as a tank, you can still use all of your abilities. You need to make sure that you're using a defensive to stay alive, alternating as a DK, you know, various cooldowns such as, you know, your Icebound Fortitude or your DRW, you know, making sure to blood strike yourself to stay nice and healthy, perhaps even saving rune power. Whereas any other tank, you know, you want to be afraid of that. And the other mechanic here is that big stomp that went out. You can actually outrange that stomp as a marksman hunter, but Malene is instead opting to stand in melee, as you see that these roots are everywhere, and the roots can stand on you even if you end up outranging this stomp. When teams came to this boss earlier with a Holy Paladin, the Paladin is able to put a Blessing of Freedom on a player, and then they can simply run through all of the roots in order to break them. But with a Druid, they will instead have to run into them one at a time and then use Shift to break that root on themselves.
Yeah, and it is a good solution, right? It is a good, sustainable solution to be able to do that constantly, but the problem with it is the amount of global investment that you're going to have to put into it. That's going to be time that you can't be DPSing, you can't be healing. You're going to have to be shifting back and forth on the GCD. So very very difficult thing to have to be the only one to do it, but probably the best option is going to be that Druid, especially on a 24 where these mechanics really are going to be that much scarier. But Mage doing phenomenal damage here. Once again, that massive chunk's going to come out, but this time Maleen isn't going to be healthy, and that Hunter isn't going to have too much in the way of survivability to deal with it. So we will see Maleen go down. That's the last battle res for the squad, and we are going to see another resounding amount of damage come out here once again. And, you know, if they go down, they're going to be stumped because they have no more battle reses left. Fell Explosive getting very close. You see the Demon Hunter just surging on over trying to deal with it.
Perk procs, he's at 1%, and Rev's dead. They don't have another battle res. They just used it on the Hunter. This is a disastrous, looks like probably maybe going to be a wipe for the Dark Slashers. Explosives are going off. Everyone has died except for the Demon Hunter. You know, sometimes when you have a death in a long fight like this, you have to make the call. Do we really want to battle res a player? What if happens if the tank dies? And they took their chances here, and they ended up having a full wipe. And this is the kind of thing that we always talk about. Perhaps this could happen in a dungeon. Maybe this team is going to wipe on the boss, and then that's when the other team is going to catch up to lead. And here it has just happened. Dark Slashers did have a terrible full wipe on this boss, and now Omegasniped is well in the lead. They've got the boss on 83%. Their classes are much more adept at handling this explosive affix. Everyone's looking good. The boss is going down smoothly. Everyone's staying nice and full on top. Really, really good out of them.
Yeah, and the thing is both of those battle reses were invested by Dark Slashers on that one boss fight. So it kind of became a thing where maybe there's a path where you save one of them and then you're able to get rev up, but they just go all in. They want to keep up their DPS. There was still a decent amount of health. And this is kind of what we're saying. We can't see those mistakes early on because these bosses are going to kind of ramp up in difficulty as you move through the remainder of this dungeon. We know how scary just Xavius can be waiting at the very end. Now Oakheart already engaged for Team Omegasniped. They're still leading in the one department you don't want to be, which is the death count. They got 14 here, but they are also going to be leading now on Oakheart thanks to that wipe, 56% of the way through.
It is only, of course, a 1 death lead. Unlucky 13 for the Dark Slashers to that 14 for Omegasniped. But the boss is going down nice and slowly. Now, this guy does have a ton of health. This tree is, you know, maybe he's even 10,000 years old. It takes so long on this 24 tyrannical setting. You just have to make sure that the whole team stays focused the whole time. You can see just how quickly things can start to spiral out of control as they did for the Dark Slashers a while ago. Doing a good job. You know, these guys had a really sloppy start of the dungeon for Team Omegasniped, but, you know, they've gathered themselves together and they're progressing through very smoothly here. Another big stomp coming out, but of course, similarly to the large AoE damage that comes out in Blackrock Hold that teams have to deal with, as long as players have an adequate amount of health for when that stomp comes out, it will not one-shot them.
Definitely an important thing to keep in the back of your mind. Team Omegasniped getting close here to being able to pull ahead and take down this boss. Dark Slashers right now giving it their second go. It all fell apart kind of around the place where Team Omegasniped is at now, and it was slow. I already mentioned they used both of those battle reses. They're not going to have them for a long time. So Team Omegasniped is going to have a little bit more in their tank as they progress in this dungeon. We know that battle reses can be very important here, especially when you're getting to fights like Drezeron. There are a lot of chances for people to go down.
Of course, now we did see Maleen has learned from his mistakes on the previous attempt. There is a 40-yard range on that Oakheart stomp, and he was standing quite far out. So when that stomp comes out, he is no longer being hit. But you see that the boss isn't enjoying targeting him with that tank throw, so he has to run back in. Otherwise, the Rev's going to have to run quite a considerable amount of distance. 33% health on Dark Slashers, Oakheart to 3%, and now dead from Team Omegasniped. They pulled this boss significantly later than the other team, but of course that horrific wipe happened, and now they've pulled ahead.
Now they're going to be moving about by getting this pull going. And we do know that you got to be careful with those Blood Furies. We know that they can actually spawn those additional adds that aren't going to be worth any percentage. And they're really not the easiest trash to be bringing down either. They do have potential to spiral out of control very quickly. And that's why you are going to see that large amount of time that it does take to actually walk them away. Oh, Maleen actually going to go down again on the other side of your screen. We'll get back to that Fury in just just a second, but the Fury of Oakheart seems to be too much for Dark Slashers to deal with just now. And I'm curious to see what is really causing this. Did Maleen get too close again? Is it coming down to Fell Explosives? It seems like they've been having a hard time with them as well, and they're not going to be able to get him up for this rest of the encounter, which is a 13% left. It's definitely, that's just going to slow them down that much more.
I was certainly rooting for this Dark Slashers team earlier, but, you know, the Dark Slashers that we saw just a while ago, you know, what happened to them? And same with Omegasniped, right? But it comes down to the idea of the greatest opponent of both of these teams is going to be themselves. How strong is their mental game feeling right now? They've both had tons of games these days. They're both exhausted, doing their best to stay alive here. And of course, players have to be really careful of Sanguine in this ankle-deep water on the way up to Dresseron, because it can be quite hard to see those puddles. And if you run through them within this little water, it can be quite devastating to you.
Doesn't matter if the Sanguini's under 8 feet of water, it's still going to do Sanguini things. But yes, it's been a long day. I totally do vibe with that. I totally do agree with it. But this is just really your most important series, and these simple little mistakes are going to be what causes you to not qualify for the LAN. Both of these teams haven't been playing perfectly in this 24, but it seems like for the most part, Team Omegasniped has found their footing. Now Dresseron's going to try to knock them right off their feet, as we do already know. But before we jump in, start talking about Dresseron, I want to note the other thing that is going to be difficult for a squad like Dark Slashers that's grabbing these deaths late. That checkpoint is very far back. So if that ever does become a thing for them, they have a very long road ahead of them. But now let's actually take a peek at Dresseron as it has been engaged by Team Omegasniped.
So of course for Dresseron, the common theme that we're going to see here is teams love to pick up additional whelplings in order to do increased single target damage to the boss. And we see right now he's using his downdraft ability to push all of the team members back, and it does a ton of damage to them, and it continually over time, as well as making all casters' lives miserable. And then he'll follow it up by this earth-shattering roar, which is going to do a ton of damage and drop a puddle of goop on the ground that you cannot stand in. And the final ability that he's going to be using on these guys is the breath that he's going to be casting at the tank, which you need to make sure that you don't stand in, otherwise you're going to take a ton of damage. And this boss is going to continue to ramp up and get a little bit out of control. Luckily on Dresseron, these whelplings do not spawn any explosive orbs, so you don't have to be too afraid of pulling them into the boss with you. On other affixes like Necrotic, doing something like pulling these whelplings can be quite terrifying, but they're doing a really good job handling them now, getting some extra HPS and DPS out of engaging those mobs into the boss.
Exactly, and that's kind of a reoccurring theme that we've seen on any bosses that have that exact same mechanic, which is basically these ads that aren't instantiated at the beginning of the dungeon. You don't have to worry about these certain effects, and explosive is the key one in their minds right now. You can see though, still taking a decent amount of damage is going to be the mage as he does chunk away at Dresseron. They hit that 50% mark right around the same time the Dark Slashers are able to engage with Dresseron themselves, and you can see that they are getting knocked back right now, dealing with those wins. Team Omegasniped definitely out in the lead right now. They have that 98% trash mark, maybe going to use that Invis Pod if they are able to get down Dresseron to get straight to Xavius. They're going to have at least one more small pool. On the other and though, Dark Slashers have hit that 100% threshold, so they can just try to get as far through that gate as they can in an Invis Pod.
Of course, once again, we see Maleen has opted into that meme build, as it's called, or the Sentinel Piercing Shot build. You trade up a ton of single target damage for the AoE potential of this build, but in a 24 tyrannical setting, perhaps that maybe wasn't the talent call that you would expect out of him. He's doing a really excellent job with it, though, but part of the AoE, there is going to be a death out of Glix again for the Dark Slashers. While Team Omegasniped has had a very clean, albeit slow boss fight here, working away very slowly. Healer's mana is getting a little bit low, but everyone is relatively high in health, so he will of course have, Jack loves to talk about the Innervate that these Resto Druids have available for themselves, as well as the supply of mana potions that are available to the Druids on the server. He should hopefully be okay, but that resource is very important, and he definitely needs to keep the team alive here on this fight.
Especially as we do see them all get getting that massive amount of spike party-wide damage. The other thing that you can't really sell off is the fact that they're going to have these 3 battle reses, especially when they do get to Xavius. We know that different things like Nightmare Bolt can just take you down in a second. So having 3 battle reses compared to 0 now again for Dark Slashers, they're going to be in that camp of having absolutely no lights in the darkness, no battle reses. They do have now on the side of Omegasniped Drezeron down, so we're going to have to see how they actually pull it. I'm assuming that they're going to end up having to deal with more trash than that 100%, but we will see as they are moving to the last boss in this dungeon with plenty to work with here. They really have shored up a lot of the problems that they had at the beginning. I think they had 2 big major mistakes, but now they are ahead as far as deaths are concerned. They only do have 14, and they're going to have heroism as well. So they're going to have all of those massive utilities headed into this final boss.
Yeah, they've got all of their cooldowns and big abilities ready, and both teams will, of course, be going well over 100% kill count in this dungeon.
Oof.
2 more deaths for Omegasniped. You know, hopefully they can clean up this pool. There are some explosive orbs. Hadrian is dropping really low. Thankfully, we get a pylon down on Luffy. Hopefully, they're still in range of that pylon for when these deaths finish up. They can still clean up the pool. If they had maybe perhaps waited just a little bit longer for the patrol to head back up to meet his friends, they could have stacked them a little bit easier. They had a little bit of trouble getting those mobs all together. As long as they can get up here and get everybody rezzed up, we see Luffy popping up now. Hopefully, he can get a big res off on his team, or he should be able to actually sneak ahead past 1 trash pool and get a mass res so they can skip a little bit of that kill count. Certainly this isn't an intentional 100% kill count out of this team, but they will have to do slightly less trash now as a result of that wipe.
They adapt very well, right? I mean, Luffy is able to get that pylon down. He's able to stealth past. Keep in mind, though, Dark Slashers, they are going to get Drezeron down. Now Team Omegasniped's going to have those 19 deaths, but they go, okay, look, we're going to have Luffy just stealth, get us all back up, but once that pool goes south, it goes a little bit south, you don't want to invest any of those battle reses, and you want to make sure that your tank goes down so you don't have that purg in a state that you're not going to be able to use that. That could be a very important thing as they go into this last boss encounter. And it looks like they also are going to have those invis potions, so they do save a little bit of time on trash. That wipe works out for them relatively well.
Yeah, maybe perhaps that was the call, or it looks like Dark Slashers is going to be setting up to do another death skip here. Edelweiss is just stealthing on ahead until she gets into the boss room so she can res her team. And then it'll be the job of Rev to get his team as far as possible so that they can all live. And so they're either going to be using perhaps a mass res and sacrificing 4 deaths to get into this boss room, or Rev's going to get as far as he can, and then his team will hopefully not be in combat for the battle res. We see Glix does end up dying early. If he is not in range of that mass res, that could be absolutely disastrous for his team. He looks like he perhaps has released now. This is really not where you want to be, but Team Omegasniped has already engaged Shade of Xavius. They have full health. They have lost Zongo, but he is back up. These abilities are very, very lethal on this 24 Tyrannical setting. Maybe perhaps he isn't quite wearing as defensive as a setup as he would have liked, because this boss can really take a life quite quick.
And the thing is we talked about the battle reses being important, going to be able to get them out, and this was looking like it was going to be a hell of a lot closer than we really thought it was going to be headed into this last boss, but that early death is going to be a huge problem here, and that's where that checkpoint really does come into debate. Finally, that res going to be coming out. They're going to try to get up everyone on the side of Dark Slashers so they can engage on Xavius, but Xavius already underway. Zongo going to go down again, but they had 3 battle reses to work with. They're going to use that second one now at that 72% mark, and he's going to take it even though at that 50%. It is a little ways away, but at that 50%, we know that intermission is going to come into play. We also are going to see, I'm fired up, using quite a lot of defensive utility here very early on. That's going to be a scary thing to think about, but should have that ice block to trade out next time. Already using that Cauterize, already using that defensive trinket off of Agrimar, so those are a lot of tools to actually use when you do get to that mark, but having an immunity is just going to kind of take the cake.
Yeah, you see just how much respect Team Omegasniped has given Shade of Xavius, as he has already claimed the life of Zongo twice. You see Fired Up has also been spinning around, and here he does it again, and he blinks out of the range of the boss. That way, when the boss targets him with a Nightmare Bolt, as long as he can get out of the range of the Shade of Xavius before that bolt goes off, it will not cast on him. And you see he gets targeted there by the Feet on the Weak. He doesn't really have anything available to him, so he's just going to simply sit in this ice block, and that 50% transition was coming up, so he...
Oh my god, I thought the ice block looked a little bit early there, and then was the one thing I wanted to touch on. Went in at 53% into that ice block, comes on out, thaws a little bit too early, and gets beat down into the ground. Luckily for them, though, they did have so many of these battle reses to work with, so they are still looking relatively valid here, going to get up, but trades so much before that intermission, and then goes into that ice block just a little bit early, but it looks like they should be far enough ahead to take it. They are going to be 10 seconds behind because of that death counter, but they've made it through the toughest part of this boss fight. Now they just need to go about those other mechanics that we talked about so much. You can see that ring around On Fire up now, once again going into that Carterize, but he's going to move on over to his Warlock buddy to make sure that they are not silenced. But Shade of Xavius going to hit that 50% mark here for Dark Slashers. That's going to be the real telling thing, whether or not they do stand a chance, but it's looking very grim.
Yeah, so if any of these teams ends up having a wipe here, or even both of these teams, they skipped a ton of trash in the tunnel in order to get over here, and their invis potions, of course, are going to be on that 10-minute cooldown. So either a wipe from either of these teams is absolutely something that you do not want to have happen. Both teams are completely out of battle reses, so they have to play very conservatively and safely in order to get through the remaining 60% health for Dark Slashers and just 25% health for Omegasniped. Now, there is, of course, that 2 death difference between these two teams, but Omegasniped is so far in the lead right now that all they just have to do is continue to play safe. Maybe they could even lose one person, although ideally you don't want to have any more deaths at this point, and they should be able to clean this one out.
It's a luxury for them, though. Once again, they're going to have another battle res here to work with. Like, they have played that timer so well. 50% mark for Dark Slasher is going to go a lot better. All the cooldowns going to be traded the right way. Everybody who has an immunity going to be able to use it at the right time there, so everybody is going to stay up. They didn't really have that heroism in the same way that we did see Omegasniped have it, so that is another kind of tick against them on this Shade of Xavius encounter, and it looks like Team Omegasniped is just far enough ahead. Will they throw, or will they be able to close out this first map and take an early lead? Omegasniped has definitely looked a lot cleaner throughout this tournament. They have gotten cleaner, and here it was kind of similar. This dungeon was somewhat of a microcosm. They got cleaner throughout it. They did have some hiccups on Shade of Xavius, but ultimately they will take down this first dungeon.
You know, really commendable job by Dark Slashers. A lot of mistakes out of both of these teams, but there's happened to be just enough less mistakes out of Omegasniped for them to take it. Now, of course, we see another one of these Aggro Marshal being proc, this Fell Shield, this Bulwark, and so as a tank, this thing is going to give you like 25 million absorb, and as a DPS specialization or a healer specialization, it'll of course be worth half of that. But as far as defenses are concerned, it's the best in the game.
Yeah, we do have to declare one team a winner there, so we're going to Team Omegasniped. But it's so funny. We went into this series and we were saying like, hey, both these teams have gotten so much better. They looked cleaner. They look like they're they're growing and maturing right before our eyes, and that did not look to be the case. I don't want to be really harsh, but we have to acknowledge it was 22 deaths and 20 deaths respectively, so both these teams got a lot of work to do in this series.
Okay, so there are certain mistakes that are definitely going to be due to the increased difficulty of the key, right?
Sure.
And those are, I'll give them full reign on it. Certain mistakes are just straight up going to be mistakes that are a little bit more, they have a little bit more to do with the fact that they were just straight up mistakes, and they would be a mistake on any difficulty. One of them, maybe you can say, is that pre-immunity, just getting that out a little bit earlier. But
saw the mage just sitting there like, please come on, cast the bolt, cast the bolt.
But even with that, I will say, even with that, that 53%, that 3% is going to be a much larger when you have that exponentially racking up tyrannical key, and you want to be safe, but at the same time, that was a little bit too far on the safe side. It's going to take the remaining teammates that much longer to get that 3% health, so that was a rough one, but they still do come out on top. The question is, how many of these dungeons have they been able to practice on this difficulty? They had a long day ahead of them on both teams, but it's going to be important. This is the most important matchup of the day, determining the last team that's going to be going to the LAN.
Yeah, and certainly the 24 map pool is much different from the 23. Sours, as we take a look at that one singular map, are you still feeling like these teams are maybe in a good spot, or do you think maybe taking that many deaths is something that could affect them for the rest of the series?
We have to wonder, like, how much preparation have these teams put into this tournament, right? Certainly, Omegasniped was not expecting to have to run all the way through the lower bracket to get here, so they likely spent a lot of time practicing only those 23 dungeons and not so much the 22s, which is why they had such a bad showing in the 22s. games, but hopefully they were expecting to be winning, right? So you would think that they would have put a lot of time into the 24s, but there was just a couple of silly mistakes here and there, a face pull or two, some deaths where they shouldn't have happened. They cleaned it up at the very end of the dungeon, but you see a couple of those mistakes, that early ice block where he had to ice block for that feat on the weak, and then he was counting that boss health percentage. Will I make it until the transition? And then his ice block wears off right in time for that explosion. So maybe their next dungeon will be, of course, their map pick, so hopefully they've practiced it a little bit more, but both teams made a ton of mistakes there, but they were the ones who happened to make just enough fewer large mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see what happens. For now, though, Omegasniped 1-0. They just need one more map win to go to that global land. Obviously, Dark Slasher is going to be looking to do exactly what they did in the first time these teams encountered each other, pull off that reverse. It's going to take a lot of effort. We'll see what happens after we get back from the break. looking at the map pool, certainly opportunities for Dark Slashers to take the lead, but as you can tell a little bit from Rich's expression, you can kind of guess where we're going here.
I don't know why it's in the rule set that they can even do this. I don't, it's gonna be such a long one. I don't even.
You want a hug, buddy? You wanna hug it out? No? Okay, we're gonna be okay.
Gonna be okay, Rich. It's only a Seat 24 volcanic. It's a little scary, right? It's gonna be a lot harder than that Seat.
I've actually asked production to bring us some sleeping bags, so we're gonna get nice and rested. Rich is gonna get some therapy.
The mercy rule, by the way, it comes into effect if a team goes twice over the.
I believe it's 1.5x the time limit in the dungeon. I think it's like 53 minutes here, so it could be a long ride. Hopefully,
or 660 deaths.
So.
Well, Rich, definitely Oscar-winning performance. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this, though. Dark Slashers had options in the pool where they've obviously had success. Vault of the Wardens is in there. You probably want to stay with Cathedral, stay away from there, as well as Team Omegasniped is look. Seat of the Triumvirate, this may be when they bust out the strat they feel comfortable with. And yeah, you know, Rich's expression really says it all. Most people aren't excited to go to Seat of the Triumvirate on a 24 key, but
I've watched Rev do this key before, and it was.
I believe the time
we watched it together. What did they get? What was their actual time?
So I believe they went into there on a 25, and they ran and did the first pull, and they had a terrific wipe on the dungeon, and then they instantly ran out. And they
yeah, it's probably a pretty troublematic showing. But we are ready to hop into the game. Let's see what happens. Let's see if Dark Slashers can make good on this, or if Omegasniped is going to continue their trend of making their opponents' picks their picks.
Hey, Sours, you know, this is first MDI. It's time for a little bit of caster bonding time.
Yeah, it's good.
Nice 4-hour dungeon.
Hopefully not 4-hour dungeon, right? We hope these guys know what they've gotten themselves into picking this dungeon. A similar story, of course, to be told on this first boss, where the Dark Slashers don't have a team comp nearly quite as suited at handling those slimes as Team Omegasniped has with that Warlock. But on a funny turn of events is the Marksmanship Hunter that people have been bashing on, running this Sentinel Piercing Shot build this whole time, is actually going to be doing a ton of damage to this dungeon. You see Rev try to use a Smoldering Titan Guard there after that stun to handle all of the damage coming out of those mobs, but he was not able to live. But luckily, they were able to kill all of that trash in time, and they're able to reset the boss and then go on it with everything dead.
Hey, look, both of these teams performed that first pull very well. They deal with it very well. They're each going to have one death. They both are going to invest that heroism, but they both get about 20% of that trash out of the way. We're going to see Dark Slashers. They're going to keep chugging along. They're going to grab some more of these globulettes, and they are going to start getting their damage in on them before they get that pull on the first boss underway. And now we can see that Team Omegasniped doing a pretty similar strategy. They are going to grab an extra death here, but guys, get used to death. Death is going to be our friend on this dungeon. We are going to get to embrace its cold, skeletal fingertips many times here.
Yeah, you know, we want to be careful though. We saw Team Omegasniped getting incredibly close to that purple ground here, and of course, all of these void zones on the ground, they'll be also spawned by this boss, but if you stand in them, it will make the mobs do incredibly increased amounts of damage onto the tank. Both teams are doing a really good job of bringing Zoral here out over to the side. He will cast Decimate on the tank, which will put this giant void zone on the ground, and it's going to be the tank's job to make sure that those go in good places so that his team has a lot of room to work with. And then he will additionally spawn all of these slimes that you see now that have to be handled. Otherwise, if they end up hitting the boss, they will not be able, you know, that they're not going to be able to continue, right? That's going to cause a lot of death. So
I think that I definitely do want to note too, and that is going to be a nice pull over there on to those slimes. But what we usually do see from Death Knights, this is one of those times where their limited mobility kit's really going to be an interesting thing, because they can't just go in and stack all of those on top of each other, because they do need to save that Wraith Walk to make sure that they have it to pull the tank away from the slime. So we are actually going to see less real estate for both of these teams, because they are using what is widely considered the best tank to be using, but just a small thing to note with how they are actually going to stack up those pulls.
And so both teams are doing something really cool now. Well, what they've done is they waited a nice long amount of time after killing all those slimes. They let Zoral run back and forth a little bit, because once so Zoral is going to send a member of either team into this nether void below the world where they have to kill 10 mobs before they gain an extra action button that will allow them to come back to the world of the living. And when they come back, it will do a stun onto Zoral and he'll take increased damage. So if your cooldowns aren't available because you use them on the pool or somewhere else in the fight, it's important that these teams have good communication so that they know when to use that extra action button and leave that nether world so that they can get the most out of that transition.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you get the most uptime with that really powerful increased amount of damage that you can get out. And then you can see constantly Rev, he's gonna use that AMS, he's gonna dip in, going to try to stack that up the best that he can. But both of these teams relatively close. Team Omegasniped has pulled ahead slightly as far as the boss percentage is concerned. They have broken that 20% mark just now, and we are going to have that death come in, and we can see that their Hunter is going to be the player that is under to try to actually ascertain that buff, but that is going to be another death on the side of Dark Slashers.
What unfortunately happened for Dark Slashers there, I believe, is that the Demon Hunter was in the Nether Realm and then he died, so he wasn't able to use the extra action button, and then it appears that he sent down the Hunter afterwards who cleaned up the rest of the kills before coming back up to stun the boss. Omegasniped has Ironic was sent down the first time, and then I'm Fired Up was sent down the second time. They were able to handle both of those phases really well. They did have that 2 deaths on their team during the trash before the boss, but they handled that boss very cleanly without a death at all.
So both teams pretty much neck and neck here as far as trash is concerned, as far as deaths are concerned, and they get the boss down pretty close to one another. And funny enough, they really are chugging along in this seat in a much cleaner way than we saw inside of their first dungeon, inside of Darkheart Thicket. Now, we know that there are plenty of terrors still to be seen coming straight out of the void here in this seat, but just all around, they do a good job on that first pull. They do a good job on that first boss. Now, they are going to need to run around the dungeon and try to close these rifts.
Yeah, there's lots of rifts that are going to spawn in the next room, and so while it may look like they're kind of fooling around right now, there's actually a small RP event that you have to wait for at the end of this hallway that the teams are in. As long as you send somebody into this hallway to trigger that RP event, you have all the time in the world, well, until the doorway opens, of course, to kill all of these trash mobs and get a little bit of kill count to make the most out of your time.
And there is one of those rifts on your screen right now. And, you know, some of the scariest things about this dungeon, we got to bring it up. We may as well bring it up now, and then we'll actually talk about some of the things that are going to be coming out of those rifts. Throughout the entirety of this, they need to be scared of tricksters.
Oh yeah, these tricksters, you know, we saw them claim the lives of quite a few people earlier in today as well as in previous weeks, and I'm sure if you've done this dungeon on live, you know just how tedious those tricksters can get. Of course, their patrol routes are all well known, and as we've seen similarly to elevators in previous dungeons, in theory it's possible that a player could come in here with perfectly memorized patrol routes of all these tricksters, but of course nobody is nearly that crazy. So these teams have to just be careful, know where not to stand, and then they've also got to know, okay, we were used to being in this dungeon at around this point in time, and this is normally when the trickster gets us, so we've got to be really careful of them.
The level of routine that you need to have in the dungeon to have a good feel for exactly where the trickster may be at a given time is pretty difficult, right? It really is. They can be quite tricksy. You got to be a little bit worried about them, and you can see a lot of the pathing is going to be dictated around getting away from them. And now getting another pull in here will be Team Omegasniped, and right in their tracks is going to be Dark Slashers. Still, at this point, both of these teams pretty much tied up.
Yeah, so these teams are really neck and neck here, clearing all of this trash. There is, luckily over in this area, not any of that void zone you have to worry about standing in. And what's also nice about this dungeon is most of these mobs have very similar health pools. So as long as you can have nice, consistent, even cleave on them, nothing is going to be very scary that you have to deal with at all.
Definitely. That is a big thing to note. And luckily for them, inside of this dungeon, it's not the scariest affixes. Those additional affixes for the dungeon aren't going to be anything too frightening. So they mostly just need to worry about the actual mechanics that are brought by the dungeon here. There isn't too much of an added bonus, but even with that, Zongo going to be going down. That is the third death on the side of Team Omegasniped, but we've seen this dungeon earlier. We've seen other teams try to go up against it, and by the time that they even got to this point, they had something like 70 deaths. So both of these teams seem to be prepared here. While I say that, though, Luffy is going to be anchored down as well. They need to get Luffy up here. and they're going to keep trying to pull as much as possible. They don't want to fall behind. The first Trickster going to be revealed.
So perhaps that Trickster may have been what caused Luffy's death there. Who quite knows? You know, you definitely don't want to have deaths. Fortunately, the run back from there is fairly short, and both teams did handle the patrol that is going to be very threatening for you in the case that you do end up releasing.
So the other thing with the Tricksters too is they are very scary when they pop out, when they actually pull their great trick of surprising you, because they can jump on anyone. There's no aggro established, and that's when you will see a death come out of it. That's going to be those additional 5 seconds. But once the tank actually engages with the Tricksters, they're not going to be too bad, and that is kind of what we saw there. There wasn't like this instant priority of, oh no, we need to get the Trickster down. They can still be efficient. They can deal with that Trickster while they are doing other things, but they just need to make sure that their Death Knight is going to have the actual aggro from the Trickster, because once that aggro goes onto anyone else is when that Trickster can really wreak havoc on the group.
Yeah, of course, they may be called Trickster, but the only trick they have up their sleeve, of course, is that invisibility. So once they are engaged, they are just another mob that's going to be punching the tank. They're not that scary to deal with. They're only scary if they come out on somebody who isn't the tank when you're running around in this dungeon. Team Omegasniped is on their very last blueberry here, and once this is dead, they just have a lot of trash to clear before Saprish.
They're really not that tricky. You're right. They should be called like surprisers or something like that. It's the worst surprise ever. But Dark Slashers do have the slight advantage here of only having 2 deaths. But, you know, I joked a little bit before we got into this one, and even before we were on the desk said, oh my goodness, this is going to be like a 4-hour dungeon. But the thing is these teams actually are looking really good. These are some of the best seats that we've seen so far in this tournament.
Oh, without a doubt. These guys are really, both teams are performing, you know, they're side by side the whole time. You know, sometimes one team pulls ahead in deaths, and then the other team comes up from behind them and then surpasses them in deaths. We'll see how big they can pull. Now, when we see this dungeon later, I do believe it's going to be with that explosive affix, so they can go a lot larger in their pulls here, because the volcanic affix, while there will be additional volcanoes spawning, depending on how big of a trash pool you will, they are going to always be synchronized with each other, so you're never going to be in constant movement. There's plenty of time to get around them.
I will say, though, these deaths, for the most part, have just been acceptable deaths. I think each group saw, oh, wow, for a second there, we're seeing a lot of chunk damage coming out on the side of Dark Slashers, but we see that one death come in on both sides on one of the scariest pulls in the dungeon, which is that big pull, which isn't the biggest deal because they were able to actually get down that pull. We saw a death from a Trickster. It's like, these are things that you expect to go wrong when you're inside of a seat. This is still a very difficult dungeon, and guys, they're on a 24 right now. Now we will see Saprish is going to be engaged by Team Omegasniped, and instantly they're able to go into that heroism, and this is kind of just going to be a field day for Zyronic. This is going to be a fight that he really is going to enjoy doing. So this is one of the things that, even though you do see Dark Slashers pick the map, Team Omegasniped, if they do have the practices, this is one of the scenarios where they go, okay, for our comp, Zyronic's going to have a field day.
Yeah, you know, the Warlock is going to be very, very strong here in Seat of Triumvirate. A lot of the fights are quite excellent for the way that their class functions near as that multi-daughter. Now, all 3 of these mobs that are in part of the Saprish fight, of course, share one singular health pool, so all of his damage onto these adds isn't any padding at all. It's 100% effective DPS, and as long as they can keep the adds stacked really nicely, then the Fire Mage Cleave will be able to help bring these mobs down really quickly as well as that tremendous Windwalker Cleave.
One of the reasons, though, that you highlight the Warlock is because not only is he a multi-daughter on a shared health pool fight, because that is going to be a huge amount of damage, every single one of your dots on every single one of the targets, but because of how Warlocks do function, having that agony across all of those targets is going to increase your soul shard generation, which means more unstable agonies on whichever target you do choose. So it's just, it all feeds into itself, and that is why we are seeing right now Zyronic already doing 3.7 million DPS on this boss fight, but it is engaged by the Dark Slashers as well, and once again, it is going to be the Demon Hunter who goes down, and we saw Glick hanging out in the danger zone for quite some time. Battle Res going to be traded out here. They are going to have their heroism in just 20 short seconds. Are they going to opt into using it? They would have this full uptime here, but still at this point, we have not seen the Demon Hunter get pulled back up. There we go, Glick back to into the world of the living.
So, of course, that is the last battle res that Dark Slashers has available for them for quite a long time. You see that spinny wheel on it. You know, this is a 10-minute recharge on it. It looks to be about a quarter full, so they've got, what is this, like, it's not going to be until that 20-minute mark, right? And another 7.5 minutes that they're going to have that next battle res available. Well, Team Omegasniped still has 2 battle res charges available. Not a single one of them has been used. All of the deaths that they've had, they do have 1 more death over the Dark Slashers, but they've been at points in the dungeon where they're not really such a big deal, like you said, right? Oh, they can simply just release and run back. They haven't had deaths in these important boss fights that really can set them back, especially with those battle res charges.
Yeah, and the thing is we do kind of expect them. Right now, I'm worried about a Trickster, right? That's one of the things that could be annoying here. Obviously, you need to be pretty much a telepath, or telepaths see the future, right? I don't know what you have to be to remember where the Trickster actually is at this moment, but it's something that they most likely are not. It's going to be difficult, but they're going to get out of that range very soon. How do you expect them to pull the rest of this trash on the way to the next boss?
Well, of course, the kill count in this dungeon is, you know, there's so many ways you can go about it. Some teams like to opt to run straight down the middle of this path here, but if you decide that that's too scary, we did, you know, see Omegasniped did do a couple face pulls in the last dungeon, which you really don't want to do. You can actually hook a right into the void zone over there, and there will be generally a Trickster along that path, but there is a little sneaky hidden hideaway over in the far right of the void. But, you know, so they've opted instead to, we saw earlier in this dungeon in a 23, a team pulled these slimes that were in the roadway into the next room, as well as with the slimes that are at the entrance of the room, but they've instead taken the slimes and pulled them backwards, and now they're just going to run right up this path, and as long as they stay true and center, they shouldn't engage any of these mobs, and then they've just got a lot of trash in the next room to clear before they can engage this next boss.
I feel like Zyronic right now is just probably beaming. You know, this is not their map pick, and he's just feeling so good as a Warlock. He's been able to get impressive damage in pretty much every scenario. You can see those Seed of Corruptions doing work, and also on a lot of these boss fights, he's been very effective. This is going to be another one coming up here where he's going to look good. So all of a sudden, Team Omegasniped is looking to potentially get this 2-0 going, but Dark Slashers have plenty of opportunity to catch up on their map pick. The question is, what do they have up their sleeve? Why did they pick this one? I feel like a large portion is because they have looked really good, and both of these teams have. I think there's a level of expecting your opponents just not to be very well rehearsed, because that's been a common theme amongst teams. This seemed to be a little bit of a, we're pretty gosh darn good at it, and we expect it to be a curveball pick coming out from Dark Slashers.
Yeah. Since this this Seed of Triumvirate pick is only going to be the first round of the very final series, a map that is only going to be guaranteed that you play against when you've already qualified to go to the LAN. A lot of teams have, of course, opted to avoid practicing this dungeon altogether, and instead are just going to use the knowledge on live. Of course, Zyronic does end up going down. There is a lot of damage on this trash outside of the boss room. They will be fine here. They do, of course, still have those 2 battle res charges, but once again, it's one of those moments where it's like, okay, I died, that's all right. We're just going to finish up this trash and get out of slow res just fine. We're not going to use that battle res charge. We could very much need it on this boss or even on Lura, and so these teams are coming in here maybe more practice than the other. You know, Rev probably was really excited about Seed. I know he definitely loves his key. I see him always trying to trick teams into going into here with him, and so they're doing a really good job. But, you know, every now and then it's just Omegasniped pulls a little bit ahead, but they're still looking incredibly close despite these differences in their boss kill timers.
And it is kind of going into that, you know that this can come up, right? You know that it can be picked in certain map pools, but like you said, the only time that it is guaranteed is very late. So I was wondering when teams were going to start really picking it in a very serious way, when teams were really going to start preparing it and being like, okay, this is probably one of the best pocket picks that we can have, depending on our composition, just because we don't expect the other team to have it. So it really is a sword that has 2 purposes, but we see that Team Omegasniped obviously has made their statement about just how good of a team that they are. Even though this wasn't their pick, they have made it this late for a reason. They are prepared for just about anything, and they are seconds away from engaging this 3rd boss.
Yeah, they're doing a really good job. Fired up, getting cruelly low. There is going to be an explosion on him in a second. Luckily, he does not die there. He is hit up to full, but Luffy looks like he may have stood in the fire, and it is going to take him down. That is going to be a feels bad. You definitely don't want to be a guy standing in that fire. Of course, they will, Zongo ends up dying at the very end there as well. They are just going to res these guys up slowly. There isn't really any rush. They don't have any resurrection classes on their team, so they aren't going to opt to use their battle res when they can simply use a pylon to bring them back into the fray.
Here's this is the theme that we were talking about though for Team Omegasniped. All these deaths happen to come in at just not the worst timing. The trash pack was about to die. Everybody was about to die. Yes, it's unfortunate that 2 people went down, but you're able to just get them back up. You don't even waste the time on the run. So yes, it is bad. They're going to lose 10 seconds there. But it just could be so much worse for the deaths that we have seen in Seat before. I would even go as far as to say Dark Slashers has seen some worse deaths out of their 3 than we really have seen from Omegasniped 7. Of course, you don't want to have those 7 deaths. It is bad, but it just seems to be somewhat working in their favor. And this next boss fight really is going to be a big determining factor as to who's going to pull ahead. This boss fight can very quickly slip away from you. It got a lot of squirmy, wormy tentacles that you're going to have to deal with, and let's start giving a preview to everyone of what they need to do. Zongo going down again. All right, this is starting to get bad.
Yeah, you know, so hopefully that everything is all right over there in the Omegasniped camp. But once again, this is going to be the power of the Warlock on this fight. I do believe that their class composition is definitely more favorable in this dungeon. It's going to be a little bit harder for the Dark Slashers to handle all those tentacles, especially if they get really bad spawns, whereas Zyronic will be able to kill them all quite nicely, all on his own, maybe with a little bit of help from his friends. Whereas for the Dark Slashers, the Marksmanship Hunter running this Sentinel Piercing Shot build is going to have quite a bit of trouble dealing with these, and the Fire Mage is going to be losing a ton of damage on the boss if he has to switch off one of these tentacles to deal with them.
Viceroy going to be pulled about at the same time, but it is Dark Slashers who are in the lead. They get that pull just a tad bit earlier, as we did mention, but also they are going to be ahead here by quite a few seconds due to those deaths. They've already finished their trash as well, and now they are going to be getting pulled back, and you can see the damage that is going out onto their entire squad. The tentacles that are up on the screen, that is the reason why we feel like Zyronic is going to be a key factor for them. He's going to be able to dot them up very well while not losing too much effective damage onto the Viceroy. But we see just moving that boss there, they're going to do a very good job, the Dark Slashers, of dealing with it. Oh, was that Hypothermia and Cauterize getting procced at the same time into the Ice Block and getting Cauterized from the Mage? So 2 major defensive cooldowns on the side of Dark Slashers. That could be a little bit scary for Dilemma. Could be quite huge a dilemma moving forward in this fight.
You know, certainly a dilemma that you don't want to find yourself in. And while, of course, Omegasniped did end up engaging Viceroy a little bit later than Dark Slashers, they have actually pulled ahead significantly on the boss health percent because, you know, that is the power of their difference in the class compositions, where Dark Slashers is losing a ton of their single target damage on the boss in order to handle these tentacles that absolutely must be killed, whereas Omegasniped, they're able to just leave Zongo on the boss, perhaps even drag him around so that he can cleave one of the tentacles while Zyronic handles the rest of them. And then, of course, both teams have the Death Knight available, so when those ads spawn that shield the boss, they're able to grip them up on top of each other and cleave them down very efficiently onto the boss.
The thing that's even nice that they're doing is I'm Fired Up basically gets his own tentacles, so he actually does still get a lot of uptime. And you'll actually see that from I'm Fired Up. He'll just sit on one of them, and he will get to cast the entire time. This time it looks like he's going to be investing quite a bit more damage onto the boss, but that is a nice thing that you can do to keep that Fire Mage dealing a lot of damage. The Warlock gets to dot that one, gets to reap the benefits from it, but at the same time, they are working around their class compositions very well. They are still slightly ahead here as well. And they're somewhat at the point of just like, okay, we can just kind of keep playing our game. They don't have to be too scared as we see more tentacles spawning out right now.
No, another thing that's also why this is a really smart dungeon pick, I almost think, out of the Dark Slashers, is, of course, Omegasniped is running a double caster comp in here versus this Quaking Affix, where these DPS both run the risk of getting kicked by the Quake, trying to get one of their spells off, whereas Marksmanship Hunters have nothing to fear, especially when you're running this build that really loves to multi-shot. Not like you could be kicked on your aim shot anyway, but only the Mage on their team, as well as the healer, is afraid of this Quaking kick, whereas these 2 casters, as well as the healer on Omegasniped, are always, you know, thinking about that Quake timer in their mind and how is it going to affect their DPS rotation.
Yeah, you basically say with the Quaking, Mage for Mage, Druid for Druid, sure, that's going to make it even, and then Zyronic going to be the icing on the cake. Zongo gets chunked all the way down to 3%. Luffy, though, ice in Luffy's veins, going to be able to get Zongo back up here. And now they've pulled ahead slightly more on Viceroy. They're going to need to do about one more trash pull, though, before they do get into Laura's room. Do you feel like any of these guys are better situated for Laura, though? We talked about how Zyronic was so good on Saffrish, how Zyronic is really good on the Warlock against Nizar. Do you think that there is any favoritism going on? Because, you know, in my mind, Zongo is one of the players that's going to be able to get that big burst damage done on Laura. I think that might be the biggest strength. What do you think about that? I know you have a lot of experience with Hunter.
I know. So, of course, this Hunter build is not actually going to be as strong of a single target build as some other marksmanship builds. And even compared to Beast Mastery, it may fall a little bit behind. The highlight, of course, on this next boss, I do believe is actually going to be Zongo on that Windwalker. During those increased damage phases that the boss has, those Windwalker cooldowns are going to be doing so much damage for this team, as well as, you know, it's so much stronger than the Demon Hunter. Now, Demon Hunter, of course, is a very safe melee pick. They're able to pump out a ton of damage and self-healing, and they do have immunities that the Windwalker doesn't have. Windwalker is much more of a glass cannon in these dungeons than the Demon Hunter is, but of course the trade-off of being that glass cannon is it just does so much damage.
Hey, I'm gonna do it for the memes right now, but BM Hunter's actually really good on Laura.
Yeah, you know, BM is good, but it's, you know, it's... I know,
it's really good.
It hurts my heart to say that BM isn't good, but that's just the way it is sometimes. You know,
I had a whole MDI where I got to talk about BM without you, man, and it felt good.
I know you love to talk about Dire Beast, but they're unfortunately, you know, neither of these teams are in too dire of a situation, and both of these guys are playing like absolute beasts.
Oh, Luffy, you know, gonna go down there, but yeah, you are gonna miss out on Stomp. It's actually an ability you can talent into to do massive amounts of AoE damage. I'm not sure if you ever heard that one before, but no BM Hunters here, none at all, as we do move into Laura's room, and we're gonna be looking at Zongo to see if he can get out that burst damage. That really is going to be the thing. If you can get that burst damage out onto Laura, you're going to be doing a lot more effective damage, and a lot on the line, because if Omegasniped is able to win this on Dark Slasher's pick, all of the sudden they find themselves going to the LAN, and they will be playing in the next series for first place. Big deal for them. Can they close it out here? They are a few seconds behind here, 30 seconds behind. They got to kill this boss just 30 seconds before Dark Slashers are able to.
Of course, a lot of the times Omegasniped has engaged a boss later than Slashers and has passed them and killed it before them. And now they're going to be able to likely engage Lura before Dark Slashers is able to. They were, of course, when they finished Viceroy first, there isn't that much trash in between Viceroy and Lura, so they were able to clean up whatever remained. You know, they came into this also with 95% of that kill count, and the additional 5% is, of course, waiting in this room for them. And once they've engaged Lura, of course, she doesn't take any damage at all, and so they're immediately going to switch over under this Greater Rift Warden, and we see that they do not actually have their Netherwinds available for them to gain that additional haste buff once Lura transitions into her weak phase. But as long as they do a good job killing all of these blueberries and standing in all of the volcanoes, they'll do good.
Down. I do want to bring up, though, you know, we've gone back and forth about whether it should be heroism or whether it should be bloodlust. You know you're a hunter when you say Netherwinds. We're going to see, once again, another death coming in from Dark Slashers, and they have engaged on Laura, but this is pretty convincingly going to be a team wipe. I think they do need to just wipe it up. Heroism going to be popped on the first vulnerability for Laura on the team of Omegasniped, and this is looking very good for them.
Well, we're likely either seeing just the hero out of the Mage's Legendary Ringer for the team. You know, of course, that
because it is still on cooldown. Yeah, I got shiny things, bro. They distract me.
Oranges are quite strong, right? Unfortunately, Dark Slashers did have a full team wipe there. They were able to, you know, clean up what they needed to in order to get back into this fight, but once they lost their healer as well as their hunter, there's really no recovery. It's the kind of situation that you don't want to try to sit there and muscle out the rest of the boss. Wipe up as fast as possible and get back in there and pull again, and hope that something similar happens in the Omegasniped camp.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do there? You're going to hobble about on one leg and then use your last battle res for that? Not worth it, not at all. Wipe up, save that battle res for a sunnier day, and now they will be re-engaging on Laura. They're dealing with that first Greater Rift Warden right now. They got it to about 69%. 10%. Now we're taking a look at Omegasniped as they're in another one of these Rift Warden phases. We know that it can be very dangerous, and now finally out of that hypothermia is going to be the mage. Everybody getting chunked down and barely holding on.
There's a pillar in the middle of the puddle. Someone get there, Hadrian. Oh, all right, that was safe. He went for the Hail Mary, and he ended up catching that ball, so they are not going to wipe there. That could have been really disastrous out of for Team Omegasniped. We did end up seeing a very similar wipe happening in the very first time we saw Seat in China, where Skyline Top had a full wipe to one of those mechanics. You know, Luffy, of course, is the man who will be the Pirate King. He and his crew are going to be able to just kind of get through the rest of this fight. There isn't very much left here. It's just going to be a war of attrition. Luffy has a ton of mana, so they'll be able to just, you know, deal with all of these puddles, go left and right, and as long as he can keep his team nice and topped, you know, so that they're not taking a lot of damage when those quicks go out, they should be able to get through the remaining 43% of this boss's health quite swimmingly.
This is just about the easiest dance you could have to do. You slide to the left, you slide to the right, you crisscross, and in a few seconds, everybody in chat, I'm going to want you to clap your hands, because it looked like Team Omegasniped is going to be that second team from NA to be able to qualify to the first ever MDI LAN in just a few short months. They're looking very, very strong here. Now, Dark Slashers, the team that did pick this map, they are engaged in that double Greater Rift Warden phase. Will they be able to get past it? Because it looks like it is going to be smooth sailing for Luffy and his crew on Team Omegasniped against Laura in this phase.
You know, everything's coming up roses right now for Team Omegasniped. As long as they can keep it together, they do have 3 Battle Reses and, of course, 3 Battle Res available classes. So in the event of some sort of catastrophic disaster, they do have that recovery option. And now Dark Slashers only has 1 Battle Res in their camp for in the event that somebody dies again. And so as long as they can keep it up, just continue to play safe. Don't take any unnecessary risks. If a cast is coming out, transition is happening, stop your cast, you know, take a deep breath, run across the room, and you know, just continue to play safe and cleanly.
And don't get too excited, right? I think they probably have a pretty good idea that they're on the way there, and that is going to be very scary for a second if you were looking at I'm Fired Up's health bar. But ultimately, Luffy not only has the 3 battle reses that they can work with for the team, but a decent amount of mana for the 10%, maybe wanting to trade out something like Interbait, and you're actually going to see Luffy's mana spike up there just a little bit. So Luffy hanging out, plenty of gas in that tank. Got to get out of the volcanic there for a second, but ultimately Laura with only 4% left, it's looking like it's going to be GG on the side of Omegasniped.
And, well, not quite so fast. There is still 1%. Something horrible could have happened, but they have claimed this, and they will be advancing into the grand finals to the LAN. Congratulations to Team Omegasniped. You know, Dark Slashers is, you know, they've had a really commendable effort in this tournament. Nobody certainly expected them to come this far. Definitely not themselves. You know, a huge round of applause to these guys. They really put their heart into it. You know, there's incredible gameplay out of these guys. A couple unfortunate deaths here and there cost them this series, but you know, you definitely can't fault them for trying. They've shown up and done an incredible job.
You know, hated on the pick at first, but gotta give it up to both of these teams. Dark Slashers with a cheeky little pick there, and ultimately 6 deaths on one side, 9 deaths on the other side. This was some of the